Hello, listeners. So, I was contacted by Rob, who I'm speaking to today, after he had listened to a previous podcast on my channel. And we had a little discussion, and we found a lot of interesting topics to talk about. So, Rob is from Austria, and I'm from the Netherlands, so we're kind of from the opposite sides of the Germanic identity spectrum, you could say. So, why don't you introduce yourself, Rob?
Sure, my pleasure. As mentioned, my name is Robert. I'm from the eastern part of Austria. I grew up close to the Hungarian border. I come out of a family of booksellers, so I was always a book nerd, but I was always also an adventurous guy who wanted to explore the world, see everything, understand everything. I have been living abroad in many countries. I've been working abroad, but at the same time, I'm also a proud Austrian. I like my home country. I like my identity. I think identity is something like the onion shape ethnopluralism thing. So I'm an Eastern Austrian. I'm an Austrian. I'm a German. I'm a European. I've studied economics. Worked most of my life for large companies, and I also studied political science, ethnology, psychotherapy. Most of the things I didn't finish. There is just not enough time in this world to work and follow all these intellectual pursuits.
Exactly. Yes, I understand the layered identity. Like, I understand myself the same way. I'm from Holland, but I'm also Dutch and Germanic and European. Yeah, that's the layered identity. And what you say is very true. I mean, in some ways you could say intellectualism is a pursuit of leisure, and therefore the best intellectuals tended to, the Greek intellectuals were all basically unemployed, you could say.
Yeah. But for me, the main driver is really curiosity. That's really my main thing. I really like to understand things, experience things, and the more the merrier. The more you know, the more complicated things get, but also the more interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's intellectual honesty that brings a lot of people to what we would call rightist politics. Though at this point, I'm inclined to just try and find another name for it, because it's not really right wing, and it's not really necessarily exclusively political. So there should be another term for this, because it encompasses a whole lot of fields. But if you're intellectually curious, you end up with views that don't align with the mainstream, because there's always dogmas in society. And you end up going against that because you find truths that are deeper than what you're told in school or by mainstream society. But to an extent, it's necessary, of course, to have dogmas. Otherwise, you can't keep an organized society.
Yeah, I think for us right-wingers, it's a complicated thing in the end, no? Because many of us are individuals who also go against at the same time. We like a state, we like dogmas, we like strong beliefs. That's some of the challenges for me in my intellectual endeavors, to find the right balance between these two poles.
Yeah, exactly. So we had a few topics we wanted to talk about. Well, since you're Austrian, I wanted to talk about two things in particular, which is the politics in Austria and how we can unify sort of a Germanic identity, us being both from sort of outside the heartland of Germany itself. But let's start with politics in Austria. Perhaps for the listeners, you can sort of sketch the situation there and what sort of interesting things have been happening.
Sure. So basically, the Austrian political landscape consists of two main blocks. One is the ÖVP, the Christian Conservative parties. Main target group is farmers, citizens, pensioners, traditional conservative people. And on the other spectrum, there's the Austro-Marxism, socialists, and in the SPÖ, the Socialist Party of Austria. In the past, of course, both parties had also different names, but that's the two main camps. And then there's so-called this Lager, the third camp, that was more or less always around from the beginning. It was never the decisive force. It was always more or less the rest of the population. So this third camp was often used as a tool, as a wedge by the other two parties to either gain power or overthrow the ruling competitors. This third camp, the FPÖ, the Freedom Party, they always claimed that the roots come from the year 1848, the year of the big revolution in Austria, where mainly the student corps, were fighting the repressions of the Metternich system, the area of the so-called Biedermeier.
Yeah, the 1848 revolutions across Europe were a combination of liberalism and nationalism, of course.
Exactly.
We didn't have it so much in the Netherlands, but in Austria, Germany, I think to an extent in France, there were these revolts. It was especially strong in Austria and Germany because it was a combination of German nationalism, of wanting to form a single German state, and to try and overthrow conservative institutions, like you say, like the Metternichian system, to get a constitution going and civil rights.
And it was a very, very repressive system. This Biedermeier time, the creation of the living room came out, or the invasion of the living room comes out of this time, because the people could not go out, they couldn't speak out about. Very, very heavy censorship, and there were a lot of spies everywhere, and whoever dared to speak up got into severe problems. A little bit like today, almost. I would say we're living in modern Biedermeier.
Yeah.
I mean, there are these voices like us, but for most people, and even for me in the end, it's really dangerous to speak up and to speak your mind.
Yeah, I actually like to sort of think of us in the same context, where it took Marxism and, well, particularly socialism and Marxism, which had been created in the 1830s or so as a formal ideology, and it took them almost a century to actually achieve any form of power, and they were severely repressed in the time. I sort of like to think in this that we are sort of in a similar position. The main difference is, I think, that the conservative repression of Marxism was actually not as harsh as the repression going on now of our sort of ideas.
True. But you also mentioned what's very true is that camp is a combination of national, liberal, and sometimes they find a good mix of both, and often these two streams are really fighting with each other within this camp in Austria, and there have been a lot of turmoil and throwing over and parties. It's exactly because of this rift of national versus liberal.
Yeah. These days, of course, liberalism and nationalism are, well, populism, you could say, is a form of liberal nationalism, but the traditional nationalism has pretty much disappeared. Like, we've got a little remnant conservative Calvinist party here in the Netherlands, which is authentically conservative. They are opposed to democracy, and they're opposed to mass voting and so on. Do you have anything like that in Austria?
No. I mean, the People's Party, the ÖVP, the Kurz Party, they have the Christian in their name. Hardly any influence, not visible. I don't think even invisible. No. They got very European-minded in the end. So more or less this idea, this religion of Europe, replaced the traditional religious roots.
So there's absolutely no intellectual tradition stemming from the old emperors like Karl Joseph or from Metternich. There's nothing left.
Not anymore, no. It was different in the First Republic between 1919 and 1938. There, especially with the People's Party, there was a strong Catholic influence, and some cardinals and some bishops played a decisive role also behind the scenes and as intellectuals, but not anymore these days. No, since after the Second World War, the Church more or less disappeared from the political scene.
No, that's a shame. I mean, our the Calvinist party here in the Netherlands is very small, but they've got this extremely traditional base. Like, we've got a Bible Belt, you could say. There's about 400,000, 500,000 or so hardline Calvinists, and even though they're not really in influence in politics, they control their own little communities, and at least they keep sort of the national identity of the Netherlands as it was preserved there. So there was another interesting thing which younger people might not know, but in the late 1990s, early 2000s, there were two politicians in the Netherlands and in Austria which were sort of, I guess you could say, populists, not really conservative, but sort of nationalist. In your case it was Jörg Heider, and in our case it was Pim Fortuyn. Can you tell us anything about Jörg Heider?
Sure. So he was really one of the first populists. He was even then, when he got to power, the newspapers and his enemies were calling him a populist. He was calling himself a populist as well. He had no problems with it. He came out of a very simple family. His father was a active Nazi in the Second World War. His mother as well. After the Second World War, his family got a lot of repressions, and his mother had to apologize to people from the concentration camps, and there was a lot of humiliation of the family even. And I think that this was very was important for his character and for his upbringing. A little bit later on, he inherited an entire valley in Carinthia, in the south of Austria. He was born in Upper Austria, a valley. An entire area of the country, the Berntal.
Okay, so like a landed property.
Yeah. This was not from his real uncle, but we call it lie uncle. So somebody who took over uncleship for him. This is one of the few things where I don't know the background. But that man, also an older man, inherited his properties to Heider, and that made him financially very, very independent. He was really rich afterwards, a millionaire, and that was part of his allure to the masses, because he was able to come over as somebody who doesn't need the politics to make money or to get something out for him personally, because he was rich anyway. And that's something he really used to his advantage, and it was also in his advantage. He was in the Freedom Party from his youth. He studied law. He was quite a talented guy. Many people claim that he would have stayed at university. He could have become a professor or a real great lawyer or legal expert. So he was really, really smart. He was ambitious. He was always a hard worker. And he was very much politically minded. I also believe that powerful people in the background were always helping him and grooming him. But I think that's the case with most good politicians in the end. Without any help, it's difficult to make it.
Yeah. And he became leader of the FPÖ, right?
Yes, in a coup, in a putsch. And that was a very, very tumultuous beginning. The FPÖ was in government then, for the first time in their history, after not in the in the First Republic and not in the Second Republic. They were stronger than 10-15%. That was normally the maximum they got at the votes. But there in 1983, the FPÖ first time made it into government. Funnily enough, with the socialists, they needed them. They didn't have enough votes to form a government alone. Normally they would have gone with the Conservative Party, but they could not get it together. So the FPÖ was in government with the party leader called Steger. But at that time also the party had these typical rifts, and they decided to be more liberal and to give up on all the national positions. Not to talk about Austria being part of the German culture, and they stressed these neoliberal positions very much. They lost all votes afterwards, despite the fact that they have been in government first time and that they had 6 ministers, I think. So they really got a big share of the government.
So abandoning pan-Germanism was not popular, is what you're saying?
Yeah. So and so this went on for 3 years. They lost a lot of the local elections, and then in 1806, Heider and some others organized a coup. There was a party. How do you call this? Parteitag.
So
an official meeting of the party.
Party convention.
A party convention, And then there was a vote, and Heider won the vote against the Chancellor of Austria, Steger, at that time, and he took over the party. This, of course, resulted in the socialists dropping them out of government. The coalition was ended, new elections, and Heider took over the party with 5%. And afterwards, there were 39 elections, national, locally, and so on. And out of these 39 elections, he won 38. So at 38 elections, they got real big gains, and he developed the party up to 30%.
Yeah. So, and he was accused of being a Nazi and so on. And I think Israel boycotted the Austrian embassy or something like that at the time.
Sure. Then in 2000, they got in the government again. So 14 years of being in opposition. Then in 2000, they were in government again. This time with the Conservative Party. Mm-hmm. And then there were boycotts of Austria within the European Union. We were already member of the European Union then. And Chirac and other socialist politicians were really openly saying Austria needs to be boycotted. Don't go there for holidays, avoid Austrian products because of this Nazi in government.
But how much was there to it? I mean, what was Heider's party platform that was really so shocking?
Well, maybe in Austria there were two things. First of all, he was a real good politician. Everybody was scared of him. It was always clear that he is successful and that he will be successful. And he was so smart and so good in discussions, so he was really difficult to beat in an open fight. So that is the reason why he was having real bad opposition in Austria, and something developed that we called the Linke Jagdgesellschaft, the left hunting party. Okay. I think there must have been a big number of people full-time employed only with the goal of destroying him. Journalists, authors, the people at the public broadcasting station. There was really strong opposition.
But why was there so much
to stop him?
Why was there so much pushback against him? Why was there so much controversy? I mean, what exactly did he propose that was so? Like, was it just that he wanted to control migration, or what exactly was it that made him so controversial?
First of all, it was his personality. When he took over the party in '86, one of the delegates said, "With Heider, I would go back to Russia again, but with Mr. Steger, the previous head of party, I would not even want to go on holidays." So he was a leader. He was a real leader. He had the charisma. He had the qualities of a leader. He was good looking, he was relatively rich, he was sporty, he was eloquent, he was intelligent, he was a people's person. There are rumors that in his home province in Carinthia, that there's not a single person whose hands were not shaken by Heider. He was so easy with the people. So that is the one thing, that he was really dangerous to the establishment. And also, Austria, we always had the so-called Proporz system between the socialists and the People's Party. Everything in the country was always divided between these two camps. If there's one school in one town, then it has to have a socialist headmaster, and the other school needs to have a headmaster from the People's Party. The same with the road assistance clubs. We have a conservative road assistance club and a socialist road assistance club. With the sport unions, with the media, everywhere in the entire country, we have this Proporz system.
He was basically threatening to destabilize the political system.
Yeah, and exactly, and to fight this Proporz system and to make sure that all these positions are given to people based on their merits and not on the political party book. So this also, this was really what the people always, there was a sentiment in the population where people said, really, this needs to be changed. But of course, all these people in power didn't like this because then they would have lost their jobs, their positions, their status, their apartments, their income. So yeah, and the second thing is, of course, he was a nationalist. He was very pro-pan-Germanic in his thinking. He always said that Austria is part of the German cultural sphere, and he once said that Austria is a Missgeburt, a miscarriage, an ideological miscarriage. And that was, of course, very provocative, but it's also not wrong, because in 1918, end of Second World War, Austria was founded as Deutsch-Österreich. And even the socialist people at that time had no problem with this, that they called ourselves Deutsch-Österreich, and that wanted to have the Anschluss to Germany. And that
an interesting thing I always found is that besides the famous Hitler referendum, of course, in 1938, there were two other referenda in Austria about union with Germany. I think just after the First World War, there was a referendum which had passed, but the Allied occupation forces didn't allow to go through because that would strengthen Germany and they didn't want that. And then after the Second World War, I think somewhere in the 50s, there was also a referendum for union with Germany. And again it passed, and again NATO banned it.
No, I think after the Second World War there was never a referendum again.
You should look it up.
No,
but yeah, okay, if you say.
No,
so.
it was not. It was not allowed anymore. You know, after the Second World War, we have been occupied for 10 years, from 45 till 55. Austria was divided in 4 sectors: the Russians, the French, the British, the Americans, and Vienna was divided in 4 sectors. And the first district of Vienna was controlled by all 4 parties for 10 years. And at that time, really, it was not possible to do anything on the political level that went against the grain of the Allied forces, and a reunification with Germany was out of question for that reason. But also the populace did not want it anymore.
Okay,
even my grandparents.
I actually want to still talk about Heider before we go into more political stuff, because we're recording this on the 6th of May, which is the day Pim Fortuyn was murdered. It's and I find it.
I remember him.
Yeah, and I find it very interesting how the things you say, because it's very similar to what Pim Fortuyn was doing. He was also a lawyer. He was quite popular. I've got an interesting anecdote for Dutch listeners. Is that my father, who was involved in local politics in Rotterdam, he once refused to accept Pim Fortuyn into his party because he thought he was too right-wing and too braggadocious. My father is a communist, and then before Pim Fortuyn became a populist, he had also been a Marxist. So perhaps if my father had accepted him into local politics, Pim Fortuyn would never have gone into national politics. It's a funny, interesting anecdote I like to think about. But anyway, he was a lawyer and a very charismatic, popular figure. And in the Netherlands, we had a similar system, what you're saying, with 2 parties, but here it was 3 parties. The VVD Liberal Party, the PVDA Labour Party, and the CDA Christian Conservative Party. And they kind of divided all political institutions between them. And Pim Fortuyn was threatening to upset this balance, and he was demonized in the media. And of course, Pim Fortuyn ended up being shot, and Heider ended up in a sort of suspicious car crash, right? More or less around the same time, early 2000s. So I find these coincidences interesting. Well, can you tell anything about the death of Heider as well?
Yeah. Maybe what's important before is that there was a split in the party again before his death. In 2005, he formed a new party, the BZÖ, Bündnis Zukunft Österreich. So, Bündnis, Team Future Austria.
Yeah.
And because there was his party members got too friendly with the Conservative Party they were in government then, and he was not happy with all the compromises they made with the Conservatives. For him, they lost their profile, so he split. He founded his own new party, the BZÖ, and afterwards he almost wanted to destroy the Freedom Party, and there was a real strong fight between him and Strache. Strache then became the new leader of the Freedom Party, and the two really didn't like each other. And then the BZÖ was really very difficult for them. They didn't have any structure, no money, no nothing, but he managed to keep them in parliament in the elections with 4 or 5%, and then he made his way up again. And 2 days before his death, he made good with Strache again. There were then talks about him reunifying with the Freedom Party, them both joining forces again. And 2 days later, he was dead in a car crash in Klagenfurt in Carinthia. I think it was 1 o'clock at night. allegedly he was in a bar before and he was drunk and he was driving super fast and he lost control over his vehicle. But there were many rumors always that this is not possible now. The timing was so weird because of this, with him making good with Strache and the Freedom Party again, and most people, or many people I know that knew him, were claiming that he was never drunk. That whenever you always saw him with some alcohol in public, but he never drank it. He was throwing it away. He wasn't into alcohol. He was just a populist. No? He would not have refused a glass of schnapps, never, but he wouldn't have drunken it. So nobody knows, of course, but I think there is a reason for doubt that he did not, that this was not a real accident.
So are there like popular conspiracy theories about why or how he would have been killed? Because there are with Pim Fortuyn. With Pim Fortuyn, it's sort of a semi-mainstream conspiracy theory that because he was murdered by a green left political activist who had possibly murdered someone else in the past, and it was sort of allowed that this guy got close and murdered him by the political establishment. That's sort of like most populist, rightist people in the Netherlands will tell you that's more or less what they think happened with Pim Fortuyn.
And here I think it's a split camp. Whoever hated him has no problems with the official story. Whoever liked him has real problems with the story. And we will never know, most likely. No? We will never really know. What's also strange about him, he also met with Gaddafi and with Saddam Hussein before his death.
Okay, interesting. Those two would end up going 10 years or so later. Yeah.
Yes. And Gaddafi's son was studying in Vienna, and he was close friends with Heider.
So here in the Netherlands, Pim Fortuyn kind of left a legacy of breaking political correctness and opening the way for new political parties. What's Jörg Heider's legacy in Austrian politics?
Yeah, I think everybody would say that he is one of the top three politicians after the Third World War. Kreisky from the People's Party, Heider, and then afterwards you have to think long to think who could be the third best politician. So he really left a strong legacy. He also changed the political culture. He was really fighting for a new style and breaking up this proports system. Everything that's happening now, he was laying the groundwork for it.
I see. And the FPÖ afterwards, it's the second political force in Austria since then, more or less, right?
Now, meanwhile, they're almost back to number 4, I'm afraid to say. In between, they were really strong. When Strache took power, we were all disappointed because Strache was no match to Heider. He was not as intellectual, not as eloquent. He was nothing. But he was a very, very hard worker. He was very, very into it, and he put in all the effort, and he brought the FPÖ back to 30% almost. And there were until recently, there were chances that they could become party number 1 in Austria even. But then last year we had this Ibiza scandal, another coup of the political system. Then don't know whether you know anything about Ibiza.
What I know about it is that the party leader went to Ibiza, where he met someone posing as a Russian oligarch or the wife of a Russian oligarch, and she was basically offering him money for more pro-Russian politics, and he was being really. He had been drinking, I think, in the recordings because this was all recorded, and he was really talking tough and saying, "Yeah, we can do that, and we want you to buy the rival newspaper," something like that, I think.
Yes, but I mean, it was a trap. It was really organized in a very, very clever way. 1 year of pre-works to set up this trap. It was a real conspiracy. Meanwhile, we know a little bit more about the people who organized it. Then this villa on Ibiza was full of microphones and cameras everywhere. And then what was released was only 3 minutes out of 7 hours. Nobody ever saw the entire video of that evening and night. Nobody knows everything that was discussed and talked at this occasion. the thing that was delivered to the press, to Süddeutsche Zeitung, they published it, and then in this video you only see 3 or 4 minutes, the best of, more or less,
Okay.
but nobody ever saw everything.
And who do you know who was behind it?
That's very dangerous, of course, to say. And but there is one lawyer involved. He is very close to another lawyer, who is the main lawyer of the Socialist Party in Austria.
Mm-hmm.
And 1 year before, we had another scandal in Austria with a guy called Silberstein, an Israeli political agent consultant who was employed by the Socialist Party in order to ruin the reputation of Kurz, because at that stage the Socialists were very concerned already about Kurz, and then the Silberstein affair came up, and it was a real big scandal. And some people say that Silberstein laid the groundworks for this conspiracy.
Okay. And what was the public reaction? I mean, I imagine that people who, like the liberals and so on, for them it's like being pro-Russia is proof that you're like in the pocket of Putin.
It wasn't about being pro-Russia. That was really the People's Party. Before, they had delegations sent to Moscow, and Gudenus, the second party member, who was also at Ibiza, and he was the boss of the Freedom Party in Vienna. He attended the diplomatic school, and he is fluent in Russian, and he had real good connections to Russia. And so this being more pro-Russian, or having at least open talks with Russia, was party line before. Mm-hmm. In this scandal with Ibiza, I mean, that was only a side topic, that this lady was a niece of a Russian oligarch, or she posed the niece of a Russian oligarch. No, what really destroyed Strache at this occasion was the corruption, or the potential of corruption, this giving political favors in exchange for money, and that he wanted to interfere with the media in Austria, and that he wanted her to buy the biggest newspaper in Austria, the Kronenzeitung. Which of course is very odd, because at that stage the Kronenzeitung was the first time in their history really pro-FPÖ. It's so odd, it doesn't make sense, because normally the Freedom Party was always in very bad press in Austria, hated by the establishment, hated by the public broadcasting station and by all the newspapers. But the Kronenzeitung, the largest newspaper in Austria, with 2.5 with a circulation of 2.5 million copies. Mm-hmm. That was, at that time, they were pro-Strache, pro-FPÖ very much.
Interesting. Maybe it was historical grudges. You know, you can never tell. But I know it was a setup. And so they kind of lost. Strache resigned, right?
Strache resigned, and Hofer took over. He was the presidential candidate who almost became the president the year before. He got 49% of the votes, and Van der Bellen, a candidate from the Green Party, got 51.
I remember this.
You know, it was so close. It was a head-to-head race, and one election had to be the election had to be redone, because the Freedom Party proved that there were shortcomings by the counting of the votes, and that there was manipulation in the vote count. So therefore, the election had to be repeated. But then Van der Bellen won again, and Hofer almost got more than 50% of the vote, and he then took over the party after Strache had to resign.
Right.
But the coalition broke. Kurz terminated the government with the coalition, Freedom Party.
Yeah. Because before the scandal, the FPÖ was in government with the ÖVP, right?
Yes, yes, and they did a good job. Both parties were really happy with it. They did a lot. And one of the decisive things were that they voted against the worldwide migration pact. Austria was one of the
Marrakesh,
few countries.
The Marrakesh deal, which was this big deal a year ago, and now no one remembers.
True. But most countries in Europe voted in favor of it. Austria voted against it, and this was mainly because the Freedom Party didn't want it. And then Kurz played along.
What do you think of Kurz?
Well, he's obviously really talented. I know him a little bit from his youth. He's from Vienna. He's now, I think, only 33. He's in politics already so long that you think that he must be much older. He must have been groomed heavily by some real high caliber people in the People's Party. At that stage, the People's Party was really lost. There was nobody with any leadership qualities, and they were really, really nowhere. They were in the area of 20% of the votes. Meanwhile, they're coming close to 50% under his leadership. So he's a talented politician. He can talk well. He can present himself well. But I think that he has no real ideology. He's a power politician. He likes the power, and he's a puppet. He's good friends with Soros. He's good friends with Netanyahu. Now with the corona crisis, the reason for the lockdowns in Austria and that we were faster than others was because Netanyahu called Kurz and warned him that this is serious. And then Kurz took it serious, and so we were one of the first countries to be really restrictive with the corona measures. So, long story short, Kurz is of course better than many others, and he has his talents. But I think he is in the end very dangerous because he is most likely remote controlled.
So, how's if we look at it geographically and party-wise? Austria sounds like it's dominantly right-wing with the ÖVP and FPÖ. And is that like cities left-wing, countryside right-wing, like in most countries, or how is it split?
True. Vienna is historically a red town. Vienna used to have almost forever a red mayor. They are in charge of all the utility companies, the public transport. 40% of the flats in Vienna are owned by the city of Vienna, Gemeindebau, council apartments. So they have a lot of power, a good financial base, and we have had a lot of migration also, and many of the migrants also vote for the Socialist Party. So yes, the towns are predominantly left, the countryside predominantly conservative. But even on the countryside, for many people, it would be hard to vote for Freedom Party.
Because they don't have candidates, or?
No, because it's somehow dirty for many people. You know, the traditional Austrians, they want to, even if they're conservative, they don't want to go into fields that are a little bit dangerous for their reputation. Most people would be almost ashamed to admit that they vote for the Freedom Party.
Yeah, we had that for a long time with PVV of Geert Wilders over here. But more and more, the Christian Conservative Party has become less and less conservative, and the Liberal Party has become less and less conservative socially. So we see big defections from those parties towards the new form of democracy, and PVV is sort of a mix of all kinds. But what sort of the percentages? Is it like 70% conservative and 30% leftist, or how? What's sort of the balance?
No, it's 50-50.
50-50.
It's really 50-50. In Austria, we have the Socialist Party. They are now in the area of, let's say, 30%. Then we have the Green Party. They were out of parliament the previous elections, and we were also happy to have them out of parliament and destroyed. They also had a party split that helped. But they are back in government even, and they are back at 10-15%. Then we have a third party called the Neos, a liberal party, which was a split off of the Freedom Party in the 90s. We founded a party called the Liberal Forum, and that then merged into the Neos, and they are left liberals. So these three parties together, approximately 50%, and then the People's Party and the Freedom Party have the other 50%. The ÖVP, meanwhile, is above 40% at all the polls. And we have a new party now. Strache was expelled out of the Freedom Party. He lost his party membership as a result out of this scandal. And he formed a new party called the DAÖ, Die Allianz für Österreich, the Austrian Alliance. And just yesterday or the day before yesterday, he announced that he will participate in the elections in Vienna this year, and that he also will run for state elections.
I see. So, yeah, I think that's more or less all the information people would need about parliamentary politics. So maybe let's get into like meta-political institutions. Now, Austria is famous for having Martin Sellner and the Identitarians.
Yes.
I know the Dutch Identitarians, but they're completely unaffiliated with the Austrian and French Identitarians. So what's your impression of Sellner? What can you tell about the Identitarians? Their like influence in Austria and so on?
They are very influential. They get a lot of media coverage. Sellner is a real great guy. He is a workhorse. There he has some similarities with Heider. He is a real political talent. He is such a hard worker. He is really smart. He can stand his ground. But somehow the perception of them is stronger than the reality, because in the end, there are maybe 50 people, 100 people. That's the inner circle. And it's very hard for them to expand because of all the scandals and the infiltrations, and so it's hard for them to grow. And I'm always a little bit disappointed that not more people show their face and make a public appearance as well. Because there's Sellner, and then there are some others, but the others are 2 levels below almost.
So they've kind of stagnated, is what you're saying. They haven't been able to expand very much. I mean, I haven't seen them in the media. Like, they used to pull a few big stunts a few years ago, like putting a burqa on the statue of Maria Theresa, and this hanging banners from, I think, the foreign ministry. And then there was, of course, the big action in the
Turkish embassy also. They hanged banners for the Turkish embassy when Erdogan was saying something crazy.
Yeah, they haven't done that in a long time, though, as far as I know. Do you know anything?
They can. Okay. So it got really hard for the Identitarians to do something. The state prosecutor from Graz was going after them. There was a real witch hunt. Hundreds of policemen in Austria were looking for some stickers from the Identitarians, and whenever they found a sticker somewhere, they made a big case out of it to have something to prosecute them. Then finally there was a trial, and 18 of them were put in front of the court. And then it took 1 year. It was a really long political trial, and then they were set free afterwards. Everything vaporized. They were acquitted. But in that time, it got very hard for them to do anything, because it was really consuming all the time, energy, and the resources. And then after they were acquitted, there was the next thing with this with Brenton Tarrant thing.
Oh God, yes. Yeah, I remember that. He had donated like money to them, right? And that caused a huge scandal.
Exactly, to Martin Sellner personally.
Okay.
And of course the media got the wind of it, the public got the wind of it, and then this was the next big scandal. It didn't have any real legal consequences for them, but that made things even harder for them to do something.
Yeah, it's not good for their reputation. I mean, legally, what can you do? Like, anyone can donate to anyone, but... Yeah, I understand that this is very damaging to their reputation.
And also for not only to their reputation, but it got even harder for any activists to show their face and to say that they like them, that they stand with them, because it was hard before and now it's even harder.
I see. Do you think they have a future?
They founded a new initiative called Die Österreicher, the Austrians. Because one of the problems of the EP in the past was it was a real youth movement. It was only for young people. It was an activist movement. So they did all these cool actions, but somehow they could not address the entire populace, the entire population. And with the Österreicher, they want to make a people's movement, mainly against immigration, mainly against open borders, mainly about protecting the Austrian tradition and the Austrian way of life. And they started quite well, but then the corona thing happened, and now with the quarantine, this new initiative came to a halt again. They try now to revive it and to start again with their meetup and stuff, but it's difficult. I'm not sure whether the EP, I think the brand and the name is a little bit burned. I cannot foresee the future, but it will be hard for them. But Martin Sellner will stay a factor, I think. He won't go away anymore.
Yeah. But they're not really like they're in a way a sort of new manifestation of right-wing politics because they're not very conservative in their social attitudes, right? I don't think they ever talk about things like homosexuality or abortion.
Yeah, they don't talk about it, but I was at many of the meetups, so I have spoken with many of them, and I know that Martin Sellner is a devout Catholic, and he's attending a traditional church with Latin mass and so. And his wife, Brittany Pettibone, married last year. She's also a traditional Catholic, and also previous people from the Freedom Party out of this field also sympathize with them. And I met many of the activists who are also quite traditional Catholic guys. But this is something they would not talk in public. Somehow, and they wouldn't enforce it. You know, they would rather have these preferences that life should be like this, but they don't want to make policy out of it.
Yeah, because I think in a way, focusing making a narrow front and focusing on the most important issues might just be the best strategy rather than trying to form a very broad ideological appeal. You just say you focus on issues like migration and foreign influence in politics, because that's really what people on the street are concerned about. So I guess that's similar to what Geert Wilders does. Geert Wilders is not really pronounced on anything political outside of migration and Islamization. And for the rest, well, he has this one standpoint, which is our people first, and he's a bit of a socialist on economics because he wants better pensions and so on. So I guess he has some more positions, but it's the focus on small issues that makes it strong. I think it doesn't get you distracted.
True, you have to choose your battles well. No, there's not that much power, and there's so much resistance anyway, and you choose battles well.
Exactly. So we discussed a little bit of pan-Germanism, and I think pan-Germanism will lead us to another topic afterwards in the context of economics, which we also wanted to get into. But let me first talk a little bit. I'm a proponent of pan-Germanism from multiple perspectives. Firstly, because I think the Netherlands is too small to go the world alone. So I think that a union with Germany, not completely integration, but like how the Bundeslande are now is not really, they're not independent Länder, but they have some independence. So I would prefer to have a real confederacy of Germanic nations. So more independence for Bavaria, more independence for Saxon and so on. Then integrate Austria and the Netherlands and Flanders into that, which would allow us to become a very, very strong power bloc economically. We've got historical ties. Now Austria, of course, has more ties with Germany today. I think this has a lot to do with the language as well, because you still speak German, Hochdeutsch, whereas in the Netherlands we speak a variant of Plattdeutsch, which has sort of disappeared in Germany and Germany itself. In the past, the northern parts of Germany also spoke dialects of Plattdeutsch, but those have somewhat died out. If you find an elderly person, they will speak it sometimes, but mostly it's become standardized to Hochdeutsch, especially the youth doesn't speak it anymore. And at any rate, the youth of all countries at this point speak some sort of mulatto language of English and Dutch or German, so it's not going the right way anyway. But identity-wise, ethnically and so on, we're tied to Germany. Then economically, we're strongly integrated with Germany, so I think we're sort of the port of Germany. We're very dependent on ferrying products to and from Germany. So I think a union is in our advantage as a replacement for the EU in a way. It would also allow us to have a more stable currency because the euro right now with certain countries is a mess. So what's the Austrian perspective of German unification and a sort of replacement for the EU?
Yeah, difficult. I think these days it's not easy to be in favor of it because Germany is even more cucked than the Netherlands or Austria.
Yes.
So part of me is almost proud that we are not too closely intermarried these days because whatever I see and hear out of Germany, and whenever I am in Germany, I'm shocked. I mean, Austria is really paradise compared to most German towns and areas. But at the same time, of course, with our history, with language, with the economy and everything, it would make sense, and I would definitely prefer this pan-Germanic region to the European Union, which I really, really dislike, and I don't see much positive out of it. So I have mixed emotions about this. But at the same time, nothing is stable now. Everything is in flux, and I think also the Germans can get a grip. And maybe even now with this Corona crisis, there is some resistance starting in Germany now as well, more than in Austria, because somehow the authorities seem to handle this differently in Germany. And the populace in Germany, they are revolting now more than half a year ago.
We had a few demonstrations as well. So who knows? Although I don't think demonstrations will do anything to change policy, to be honest.
True.
So, but what's the general opinion in Austria of the EU? Because here in the Netherlands, we're always negative about it because we're paying for everything. It doesn't give us any benefits. I mean, in a sense, it does give us a benefit in that we are a trading nation and a tax haven. So it makes it easier for us to trade with neighbors. But then again, it's not like you can just circumvent the port of Rotterdam or to avoid Dutch industry. We have historically always been a huge trading nation, and I don't think that would change if we were not in the EU. But what's the Austrian perspective?
Well, I think many people would complain that the EU is a paper tiger, and that they come up with all these unnecessary regulations regulating the smaller parts of life. And whenever there are bigger issues like with the migration and with Greece and on the financial side, you can wait forever in the day, and the EU will not come up with any solution. Still, some of our politicians say we cannot decide on these things locally. We have to wait for the European Union. So in the past, Austria was quite pro-EU. In the beginning, there was quite a good feeling to be part of the European Union now. Like this has changed. I think if there would be another referendum, it would be very close. It would be very close.
Yeah, same here.
So an is possible. But with the media, and so they can spin the things. But we have seen in the UK that it's possible, and if it was possible in the UK, then it should be possible here as well.
Yeah. Of course, the UK has always had a bit of an independent tradition from the continent, seeing itself as not sort of like hanging off the continent, not being truly part of Europe entirely, looking more outward. Whereas we are, of course, in the middle of it and of being more mixed into the politics and the history of Europe. But
concerning the attitude towards Germany and the unification with Germany, it's difficult. I mean, first of all, after the Second World War, many nationalist-minded people lost their appetite to be together with Germany again. Even my grandparents were very disappointed afterwards because the Nazis, they didn't treat Austria too well at that time, so and the war was lost, and we had to suffer this 10 years of occupation. So this destroyed a lot in the heart and minds of people. And even before, there was this famous Austrian poet who was saying, the Germans would like to understand us, but they can't, and the Austrians would be able to understand the Germans, but we don't want to. Playing that we are a little bit different now, that we are not as strict, that we are a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more southern, a little bit more funny and witty. And
you're Catholics, no work ethic.
Yes. This is a Catholic versus Protestant thing, absolutely true. The other thing is that Austrian economy is so dependent on tourism. 20% of our gross national product comes from tourism. Many of the tourists come from Germany, and this heavy industrial tourism that we have had in the last 20, 30 years, I think this also destroyed a lot of the attitude, because the Germans coming as tourists, some of them are nice, of course, many not. So I think that these days, without a lot of metapolitical work, people wouldn't be in favor of being too close to Germany.
Yeah, the war was the same with the Netherlands. Before the war, we had a more pan-Germanic understanding of ourselves. We have always been more sort of to the side. We have never been as close to Germany as Austria, but we did understand ourselves as being part of a great Germanic identity. But after the war, that was really destroyed, because during the war we were occupied quite forcefully, which I'm not sure was necessary to do, and not in the way it was done. And then
wasn't even an Austrian who was running?
Arthur Seyss-Inquart, yes.
Yes.
Yes, he was. And then, of course, a lot of the most fervent Pan-Germanics joined the SS and either died at the Eastern Front or were banned from doing anything in politics afterwards. So, yeah, no, Pan-Germanicism is not a very strong force in the Netherlands. Most, like, nationalists do have somewhat positive attitudes towards Germany one way or another. But I think mostly we want a unification with Flanders first before anything others. But I think if we would make the argument economical, it would be more interesting. People would be more in favor of that, because that's usually the counter argument you get from leftists and liberals, is that if we were to do an exit, then we would be too weak to play a role in the international stage economically. And I think that there's, to an extent, that's true. I mean, it's a globalized world. It's very hard to go at it as just a nation state. So I am somewhat in favor of something approaching a European Union, but not in the way it is today, and it certainly shouldn't be as political as it is today.
True. Now, maybe it could be a little bit like with the Visegrad states. I mean, they all have their own unique political system and everything, and still they form a political power bloc.
Yeah, but not strong enough to do anything really, because economically they're weak. By the way, Austria and Hungary, of course, have very close ties historically. Why isn't Austria closer to Visegrad than Hungary today?
Well, we are actually relatively close. We are in more friendly relations than the Germans are, for historical and political reasons, because Kurz and Orban, they come from the same party, and they have met often, and they don't dislike each other. So we aren't so far away from them. Again, it's a little public perception management. No? The media here really hates Orban, and they always display him as a dictator, and that he is against the democracy and this and that. And he's getting a lot of bad press here. But people like him. People like him because they have think that Orban is doing something for the country and that he's fighting for Hungary and for the Hungarians.
I can't disagree with most things Orban does. I mean, he paid off the IMF debt. He made sure Hungary was financially independent. He instituted these bonuses for having children. He's blocked migrants entering the country. I mean, yeah, he did do this thing with ruling by decree and not giving parliament a controlling function. But then so did Macron, and you never hear anyone complaining about Macron in the leftist media. So I think, yeah, and
he has 2/3 of the parliament anyway. So it's in his case, it wasn't even that necessary.
No, true. I mean, in Hungary, it's even more so than in other European countries, where basically only Budapest is leftist and the rest of the country is right wing. So. to talk about economics, you had another topic since we're both interested in economics, and this one I found interesting as well. You wanted to talk about cashless society.
Yeah, that's my occupation. This is where I spent most of my career. Everything about card payments and card acceptance and the substitution of cash, the worn cash.
It's quite dangerous, I think, because
I was about to say, me personally, I don't like this tendency, but still, it's my profession, and I'm quite good at it.
Yes, yeah. I also do things for my work that I don't necessarily morally agree with sometimes. But well, you have to pay your bills too. But I think
in the end, we are dealing with a duopoly. You have a Visa and a Mastercard, and they are the driving forces behind everything happening. I think, meanwhile, in terms of market capitalization, they are number 5 and number 7 on the New York Stock Exchange. So they really make billions and billions out of this.
yes.
They are worldwide, they are everywhere, but they are American in the end. When the Ukrainian crisis happened with the Russians occupying the Crimea, Visa and Mastercard decided to block all the cards of some Russian banks because of these banks being closer to Putin. And then hundreds of thousands of Russians were stranded somewhere in the world, and their cards not working because they got on the sanction lists, and Visa and Mastercard executed the blocking of these cards.
This happened also with American alt-righters, where bank accounts were suspended, and indeed they couldn't make Visa and Mastercard payments. A book publisher or countercurrent, I think, was banned from Mastercard and Visa. These sorts of things, that happens all the time. The thing with Visa and Mastercard is, and the whole thing with the cashless society, well, let me first sketch the things, is cash allows you to escape inflation somewhat if you have negative rents on your bank accounts, which is a tendency we're definitely going to see. It's already happened for accounts over 100,000 euros, because we have so much money printing going on that it's going to have to hit the real economy eventually. I mean, it's currently being contained by basically just being put up in the stock market, and it's you've always got two parallel money systems, where you've got the M1, M2 and M3 money supply, and the M1 money supply is what most of us deal with, and the M2 and M3 barely enter your day-to-day life. Then with Visa and Mastercard, I think what they would like to see is to have a system like they have in the United States, where debit cards are very rare and you pay with credit, and you pay 21% interest on almost every payment, which, I mean, it's crazy to think about, but most Americans have at least one credit card. I think it's between 1 and 3 for the average person, and they pay almost everything with credit. So they actually pay a 21% surplus on top of almost every purchase over time.
Up to now, it's revolving credit cards, and the APR depends on your rating, and so it's up to 21. I think the one with a good rating have pay less. And I think the main difference is, in our societies, we have Giro accounts with an overdraft, and Americans don't have an overdraft facility at their bank accounts. So the credit card there is the replacement of what our people use the overdrafts for temporarily liquidity needs.
I think
because it's a different society, it's promoted in a different way. Here in Europe, we are very risk averse about credit cards and revolving credit, and in America, it's a completely different attitude. They are so much more business minded there.
Well, it's because
they don't mind.
They're raised that way. They don't even know what debit is sometimes.
Yes, absolutely. They also don't use bank transfers and direct debits in the way like we do. So our system is way more advanced in this regard. But our shortcoming is that we don't have any European system. We used to have national debit cards in the 80s and the 90s, and all of them have been replaced by Maestro and VPay and Visa and Mastercard. You in the Netherlands, you still have EDI, I think.
This is a new system, Ideal, It's a new system for payments that kind of circumvents credit card. It's basically a system to pay with debit, although you can also use it for credit. But it's a sort of wireless payment system,
Yes, and it's national. It's run by the Dutch banks, and there's no international involvement. It's really well done. It's super successful, especially in e-commerce transactions. And I envy you a little bit, because that thing is cool.
I can even I can even buy cryptocurrencies with it. So it's that developed. So the thing with cashless society is the main thing, in my opinion, is that it's about economic control, because anyone who knows anything about economics, who has been paying attention, knows that we are in a huge bubble, an everything bubble, as they call it, which is the result of constant printing going on, which the central banks, the ECB and the Fed mainly, who are the dominant players in the international system of banking. We've got the IMF, but that's sort of a different factor. They control the most important worldwide money supplies, the euro and the dollar being, of course, the most important. And they've printed, I think, the current printing level is at something like $43 trillion that have been printed since 2008. The US economy is $19 trillion, so just imagine the on-paper economy and the real economy have a differential of about 200%, I think, at this point. In Europe,
crazy.
With the EU, it's 400% more euros than in 2002. I'm not quite sure what the actual difference between paper and real economy is. I've looked it up recently. There was economic growth, of course, but let's say for ease of calculation, there's about twice as much money in circulation, although not technically in circulation, than there is real value in the economy. Most of that money is all in the stock markets, so stock markets are completely overvalued. And the thing with our modern
and real estate.
Yeah, well, not only in real estate, it's in everything. Everything is a bubble. Even gold, to an extent, is now overvalued. So you could say that one way or another, this has to collapse and prices have to readjust. That's how it would happen in normal capitalism. But with the economic system we have today, controlled by central banks, the only solution they have is print more money. Inflation and printing money is always at the expense of productive labor. It's always at the expense of savings accounts, pensions, and salaries. So you and I are basically paying for the stabilization of financial markets. And the reason that they would go for a cashless society in this context is that if they turn all interest rates negative on payment accounts and savings accounts, you're going to take your money out of the bank. You're just going to put money in an old sock, because 0% interest is better than a negative interest rate. And I think that's one of the primary reasons that they want to go to a cashless society, besides the whole credit card thing.
Yeah. This on a macro level, yes, but also on a micro level, no? It's easier to manage the people, because when there was a financial crisis in 2015 on Cyprus, you could not take out more than 200 euros a week, I think, from the ATMs, regardless of the balance of your shadow account.
In Greece in 2012, you could only withdraw 20 euros per day.
Yeah, something crazy like this. So in terms of crisis, then you have a real control over the population and what they can do. And when you look at China, in China, this cashless society is more advanced than most other places. They have WeChat and other mobile payment apps, and these apps started to exist out of the social networks there. So that's already tightly knit, and then you have the social credit score and the payment all in one app, in one device, and one thing maybe interlinked with the other. So if you want to think about a dystopian society, this kind of cashless society is a major factor of it.
Yeah, it's also a fiscal incentive. For example, in Southern Europe, I think the Italian economy is like 30% black and gray economy. And in Greece, it's something like 50% at this point of the economy is black and gray, which means it's not taxable and it's not really good to traceable. And that's another thing. If you have no
but they
cash,
made it mandatory in Greece that all shops have to have POS terminals. All shops have to have card acceptance. And you, as a Greek citizen, you have to prove on your income statement at the end of the year that 10% of your disposable income was spent via cards. If not, you have to pay more taxes.
Really?
So in order to fight this gray economy, I think, and more European countries are introducing laws or have introduced it, that card acceptance becomes mandatory.
Right. Well, we do have the Netherlands. I think the vast majority of all consumer purchases are done by debit card. And almost all shops have, PinAutomaat, we call them, where you pay with your card. cash transactions is a minority, a very small minority of consumption, but it is still possible. But some shops don't accept cash anymore, and that'll be the trend because holding cash for a shop is expensive, more risk. You need to deposit it, so it costs time. There's deposition fees and fees for the bank to take it in. So debit is much easier, or cashless payments are much easier.
And it's not hygienic, no? That's a bigger catchphrase these days, no? They increased the contactless limits all over Europe now from 25 euros to 50 euros with the argument that now in this corona crisis, handling of cash is dangerous, and having the contactless transaction where you don't even have to touch the PIN terminal, you don't have to enter the PIN, you don't have to touch the terminal, that's the most hygienic and safe way to pay.
They'll always do it this way, right? They'll never say like, we just want to control you. They'll always give you an excuse or a reason, or it'll always be for your own good.
Let good crisis go to waste.
Exactly, and that's what they're doing. So I think a cashless society is kind of dangerous. But then again, it's pretty much, in my opinion, all things that are more efficient are to an extent inevitable, because efficiency almost always wins out. So what sort of circumventions do you think? I think I'm not an expert on cryptos. I understand basically how the blockchain sort of works. I've got friends who are experts on this. They work for example, banks to do research in cryptos. But do you think, for example, cryptos would provide an alternative to a more stable cashless society?
Yeah, but of course, cryptos can go different ways. Now, the main tangent I see these days is that the crypto will be adopted by the government and by the national banks, and they will replace cash by crypto.
Yeah,
like the Swedish National Bank is thinking about it. But then it's kind of the same thing. It will have a different form factor. It will have a different environmental variables, but it will be the same thing. If it's a state run, if it's run by the national banks, I cannot see a big difference in the long run.
Well, I mean, the people who thought of crypto, like what's his name, Satoshi Nakamura or something, the pseudonym of the guy who invented Bitcoin, they have a built-in controls against inflation. Like all cryptos have as a built-in measure a limited number of supply to make sure that there's a stability of value. So it would destroy the ability of central banks to use inflation as a monetary policy. Now they might be able to circumvent it anyway. I don't know if you saw this ruling yesterday, but the German High Court had a ruling where they said that all the printing the ECB has been done is technically illegal because they don't have the mandate for it.
Yes, I saw it. Yes.
Yeah. Which is very interesting.
They will bend it again in a direction that is okay with the rest of the European Union. So that's a victory, but we will see where this leads. But coming back to this Bitcoin thing, of course, Bitcoin and these independent cryptocurrencies, that would have been a real alternative. But of course, if it's not state-run, if it's not controlled by the powers to be, it's difficult for these kind of things to really make it, because in the end, it's an acceptance problem. If you can't pay your taxes with Bitcoin, or if you cannot pay your food because it's not allowed at supermarkets accepted or so, it's only half an alternative. No, it's for the black market, for the gray market, and some niches. But in the end, I don't know. It's difficult. It's difficult. It would be cool. But I'm doubtful whether this can be a success.
Well, cryptos are sort of in a gray area themselves, because since they're untraceable, it's hard to prove.
That's not true.
Well, they're pseudonymous, right? What you can do with cryptos is, like, you've got your wallet, and if your wallet is tied to an identity, sure, that's traceable. But the thing is, you've got things like Bitcoin tumblers and so on, so you can make it so difficult to trace. I don't know if you know about this Alibaba, or know what's called Silk Road. Do you know Silk Road?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the saga of Silk Road, how that was constructed. Basically, they built a platform for the dealing of illicit substances, completely anonymous. And they actually, the only reason that they managed to catch who was behind it was because this person started trying to get involved with real life criminality. If he had stayed completely online, he might have kept pulling this for a long time, because Bitcoins, or not Bitcoin, but crypto rather, does allow for quite an anonymous level of payment, because with tumbling and so on and going to various exchanges, and for example, you can exchange cryptos for other cryptos. It's very difficult to trace.
True. I mean, of course, there are always possibilities, but you have to be more sophisticated, and you have to see this also on the acceptance side. Let's say you are a successful Bitcoin dealer and you sell stuff via Bitcoin and you collect billions or millions of Bitcoins. At some stage, you would like to bring these values into the real life. Mm-hmm. You would like to buy property, gold, or whatever. And the money laundering initiatives from the banks, this is so strict these days. They know your customer processes, the anti-money laundering laws. You have to prove as an individual or as an enterprise where the money is coming from. It's getting harder and harder. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's getting more and more difficult to bring this value, this riches back into real life.
Yeah, anything over 10,000 euros, whether in cash or deposit, your bank's going to ask you a bunch of questions that you have to answer, and they're going to try and trace it back as much as they can. So yeah, it's true. And if you don't have cash, or maybe exchange it for other things, the only thing with illicitly gained cryptos, because you can of course still make money legitimately with cryptos and then exchange those for fiat, it would be something like kind for kind trading, where you take goods in for return, for example.
Yeah, but this is especially possible with digital goods. No? So for criminals, the exchange bitcoins and get some email accounts, some bank card details, some PIN codes and stuff. I mean, there, of course, it's easily possible. But as soon as you hit the real economy and the real world, it's getting really, really hard. And even for super legitimate companies, opening a bank account became much more difficult in the last years.
Yeah. Well, like I said, a friend of mine does research for a bank here in the Netherlands in terms of cryptos. And what banks and government is especially interested in is the smart contract aspect of cryptos, because it makes everything extremely traceable. So, for example, our version of the IRS, our tax service, it would be ideal to just have a blockchain where every transaction is registered you've ever made, tie that to your identity or your social security number, and then they can never miss a single cent in taxes.
True. They also think about using the same technology now for the vaccinations. That
really?
This will, that the blockchain technology could be used for your vaccination pass, so that you can prove that you got your flu shots, your corona shots, because it's quite it's a good technology, no? It's a very robust and good technology that could be used for many purposes. But this is more or less not the original intent, no? Because the original intent, as far as I understand it, was to have an alternative money system and an alternative payment system.
Yes.
And whenever the blockchain is now used for these other purposes, that's great. But this doesn't help us much. In the end, it's not helping us, because it makes us even more transparent.
Well, the only thing that I would see as a positive is that if the government were to adopt some forms of blockchain or crypto technology into the making of currency, it would make inflation very difficult. So if nothing else, at least the value of your money would be more stable. It'd be similar to having a gold standard back in a way.
Yeah, depends on the fine print, I would say. Because at the same time, you could say, if something is only digital, it's also easy to change the value.
That's the thing with cryptos. You can make more cryptos, but because of the nature of how cryptos are formed with their algorithmic system, there's always a predefined amount which cannot be changed. The only thing you can do is subdivide values. So, for example, with Bitcoin, there's a maximum total of 21 million Bitcoin that can be mined. Because what you do with mining is you're basically just finding, like, the Bitcoins already exist. As soon as the cryptocurrency is made, it all already exists. What you're doing with Bitcoin mining is you're finding the encryption of certain Bitcoins. And once you've got the encryption, you can use that Bitcoin to transfer it to other people. This is how most cryptocurrencies work. Some have proof of stake, some have proof of work, but there's always a or a predefined supply. The thing with Bitcoin, what you can do is that Bitcoin can be subdivided into satoshis. So one Bitcoin has 1 million satoshis, which you can use as a base currency, but it cannot be divided further than that. That's just how the algorithm works. So with any cryptocurrency, if you were to adopt it as a government money system, it would always have a standard supply, because there can never be made more than what is predefined in the algorithm. That's just the nature of cryptos. The only other option is that you adopt numerous cryptos as acceptable currencies, but that would make things considerably more difficult.
And I'm pretty sure if the national banks, or the central banks, would start coming up with digital currency, cryptocurrency, I cannot imagine that they would accept these limitations. I mean,
but then they can't use it.
Hidden ways to.
The thing with blockchain.
Either then have the second. Yeah.
Right. Well, the thing with blockchain is that what makes blockchain safe and traceable is that it has that predefined network. If you don't build that predefined network, which defines the amount of crypto in the network, then you can't really use smart contracts or blockchain technology in it. It's a feature.
Yeah, but then they would introduce the Bitcoin 2 or the Bitcoin 3 whenever they run out of available units or whatsoever. So I'm just doubtful that any central bank could really live with this kind of limitations, because that's not what they did in the past.
No, I think that's why I don't think they will adopt cryptos. The thing with cryptos as well is, if you look at Bitcoin, the market cap of Bitcoin is something like $200 billion. That's not very much. Like if JP Morgan Chase decides to pump and dump the entire supply of Bitcoin, they could do it. So this is one of my theories on why Bitcoin and so on fluctuates so much, is that sometimes big players just enter the market, pump and dump the whole system, and then take the profits back into fiat. So it would need a substantially larger market cap to avoid being manipulated like that by banks to begin with. But then if cryptos are an option, what other alternatives would you see to make a cashless society more beneficial to basically the consumer?
Yeah, but I think in the end we have to be resistant to it. We should not be early adopters of all the different hypes. We should be critical. And on a personal level, I would advise everybody to change your bank cards every 1 or 2 years. There's no reason to be loyal to one bank, and they all collect all the data and all the information about you. So make it more difficult by changing your cards more often, and try to stick with cash whenever it's possible.
Yeah,
in Austria, still 50% of all payments are with cash. We are not as advanced as the Netherlands or Scandinavia, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, but like I said, I think efficiency and convenience will win the day in pretty much all occasions. This is why I don't believe, for example, anarcho-primitivism or anything like that can work. And I think that we're sort of heading towards a techno-dystopia anyway, because people are inclined to go to the way of the least resistance. And if the way of least resistance is paying with debit cards or with credit cards rather than jumping through hoops to keep cash, the majority of people will do it. And you don't need everyone to adopt it. You can have like 10% of people being difficult, but that's an obstacle that can be easily overcome.
Yeah, in the long run, yes, sure.
Yeah,
sure. So I don't have the silver bullet or the golden bullet to solve this problem, because this is major social changes that are in the making. It really all depends. If you develop more into this one world government, then it will become almost unstoppable. Maybe being more national and have smaller units could help.
That could help, but then again, you enter into the problem of scale, in my opinion, where I'm in favor of a multipolar world, because I'm not very happy about the American hegemony, because it's very callous, and the tendency of any empire is to exploit all of its, basically you could say, conquered territories. So the Fed does what it wants, like the dollar is one of, and the IMF are some of the main instruments of control the United States has. Those aircraft carriers only come up when people are being really difficult or going against the system.
Yes.
There are a few options like cryptos, like gold, where you can try and avoid the dollar, but in most if you're trying to be in trading or in the genuine economy, you're going to deal with dollars in one way or another. And the Fed just does what it wants. It'll inflate or deflate or take money in or out of this system.
There's a small objection here, Your Honor, because Russia, for example, after all these sanctions against Russia, and then there were also hidden sanctions, like the Russian banks were not allowed to do dollar clearings anymore, and here and there. So the Russians really tried to detach themselves from the dollar and set up their own clearing systems, and with China and with Europe.
True.
They gave up a lot of the reserves in dollar. They bought gold instead and euros. And
I believe they have a banking union with China as well.
Yes, and their own clearing systems where they are not dependent on the international systems anymore. And they use the euro now more often than the dollar wherever it's possible. And I think other countries and other economic blocs are also not super happy about the current situation. And a lot also depends on what is happening with China.
And the Russian bank,
China is going.
The Russian bank always buys gold every year. But then again, the Russian economy, I think, is something like 3 trillion. So
Russia's not so important. China is the main factor. No? I was mentioning Russia because I know most, and they had the most pressure and the most need to do something to change their systems, and they did. And they did successfully. They also have their own card schemes now. Instead of Visa and MasterCard, they use their own Russian scheme now, which is called MIR, M-I-R. And they implemented it within 2 years, and it's quite successful. So they proved that there are chances to be out of the system. And China, in the financial system, is pretty much independent these days. They have a lot of their own systems. They made it very hard for the international institutions to do business in China. So they are a real strong player in this field.
They
also have the technology.
I once tried to find out if you can invest in renminbi, the Chinese currency, and you actually can't. You can only deposit cash with Chinese institutions, which then hold it as an equivalent to renminbi and then pay out dividends. So you can't actually yourself hold Chinese currency, which is a very good way to manipulate your internal currency. But the thing with Russia is, though it is a small player in international economics, it has a relatively strong internal market. It's energy independent, which is a big proviso, because if you look at what countries are able to sort of withstand the international economic systems, it's Iran and Russia, and to an extent China. And Iran and Russia are both energy independent. If you're energy independent, you've got options. And Russia also has large agricultural production. It can be relatively autarkic because it's such a huge country with so many natural resources. For European countries in Western Europe,
and they are very resilient. They can deal with pressure. The population, the politics, they are very, very resilient. This is something I really like about them.
Yeah. For example, the Netherlands used to trade 860 million euros worth of agricultural products with Russia. And we'd still trade with them through secondary channels. So we, for example, export to Estonia first and then sell it from Estonia to Russia, sort of thing. But what Russia has done is they've subsidized their own agricultural industry, and they've sort of replaced all these imports with native industry quite quickly. So yeah, they're quite robust and resilient. But again, they've got 180 million people, even though their birth rates and demographics aren't very great. They're better than most of Western Europe. Energy independence and so on. So if we want to do anything like being independent from the American system in Europe, technically we have some potential to go energy independent with North Sea oil and Norwegian oil, but that's not really sufficient.
Did you hear about these sanctions against the Nord Stream pipeline?
Yes, yeah. Because
wasn't this also a crazy move of the Americans? I mean, who could dare to do something like this, and how could the Germans accept this?
Well, because we're under their heel. There are 80,000 American troops in Germany to make sure that no one ever gets out of line. It's an empire.
That's the obvious answer, yes. But still, I think this is so in your face.
Yeah, Europe does increase. I think increasingly, even European leaders, as globalist and leftist as they are, I think they are starting to understand that it's not perfect to be under the heel of America, especially since our energy dependence is on Russia. And if we were to get it from the Middle East, we'd still be in the American system. So one of the things which I hear a lot about this energy transition, I think is actually a good idea. Energy transition towards atomic or green energy, although green energy is relatively inefficient. I think the first step towards being self-reliant and independent from the American system is energy autarky, or energy independence at least.
Fully agree.
Yeah. And then currency-wise, I'm sure you know this, but did you know that the European banks have an agreement that they all hold 20% of GDP in gold?
Is it the same for every country?
Yes, they've got an interbank agreement, except Italy broke it under Salvini. Salvini sold off a lot of Italian gold supplies, which I think was very dumb. But theoretically, what the European Union could do is to declare the euro to be backed by gold. And then we would have a very strong independent currency from the US system, because if we are energy independent and we have a gold-based currency, then we're independent from the petrodollar.
Yeah, but it's also difficult. I think 70% of our gold reserves are stored in the US.
Yeah.
So the Austrian gold is not in Austria, but it used to be in Paris, London, and the US. I think we got our gold back from the Brits and from the French, but the Americans they still keep it.
Yeah, same with the Netherlands. The Netherlands has 33% of its gold in New York, 33% in London, and the remaining 44% in the Netherlands itself. And we have a relatively large gold supply. We've got about an ounce per person. So we could even make a Dutch currency that would be relatively strong based on gold. But again, it's not ideal to try and go things on your own as a nation, because any nation that
I was about to say, then we are back to this problem of being in an interdependent world.
Yeah, exactly. So if you want to do anything about the American empire, I think it has to be done as united Europe, or at least, like I said, I'm in favor of a Germanic Union. And if we take just Northern European countries, that's where the real economic power is, because the South is increasingly a dependency of Northern Europe. They provide us cheap labor and their markets, which is not in their favor anyway. But
I was about to say the same, because that's a little bit of a misconception for me, because the South, we need them as markets. No? If we wouldn't have the southern consumers, our economies wouldn't flourish as much. No? So it's not so black and white, I think, and it's not fair for everybody involved. And I also don't think that it's a good thing for Germany to be the exporter world champion. That's not necessarily a good thing to this extreme.
Well, yeah, but if we take a little bit of a mercantilist view here, then the South is being constantly drained on all levels. All their high IQ people and their skilled laborers going north, they are not making any internal products, so all the money flows out of the country. Then the only thing that's really keeping them stable is debt financed by the northern countries, which again is not really in the favor. Yes, and remittances to an extent, but it's mostly the debt. It's mostly the ECB created debt that keeps them alive. If they
on the macro level, on the micro level for the individual people, it's the remittances.
Sure. It's becoming sort of a U.S.-Mexico relationship in that regard with the South and the North. And I'm really not in favor of, because it's not in the interest of any of the normal people of Europe, because for the inflationary policies make sure that our pensions, wages, and savings in the north keep devaluing, and in the south they're still, they're an economic dependency. They're not building anything of their own. And I'm a productivist economically. In my opinion, Marx had some good things to say, especially in the sense that labor does create value, because without labor, raw materials are worthless. Without labor, there is no agriculture. You need production, and everything else is just exponents of productive labor and value. So if they're not building anything and they're just dependent on basically handouts from the north and giving all the handouts they get back to the north, that's not really helping them.
True, but it's also so difficult for them. I know most of these countries from traveling with my motorbike and from business trips, and so the economy on most of these Balkan states, for example, the supermarkets come from Germany and from France, the do-it-yourself markets, the factories, the car factories of the international car brands, and so it's also so very, very hard for these countries to come up with anything by themselves.
Yeah, I remember I lived a long time in Portugal, and I remember a deal there where what happened was they wanted to buy. There was in 2006, I think, and there was a major shortage of production of ships for the international shipping system. So they wanted to invest. A Dutch company wanted to invest in Portugal to buy a wharf there to build Casco ships. The problem there was the corruption of the system, because basically they wouldn't get a good deal and they had to take on the debts of the previous company and so on. So what they did instead was they bought the assets of the wharf, shipped that all to Southeast Asia, and that's where they started building their ships, because the Southern Europe for labor has to compete with the rest of the world in a sense, and they can't produce as cheaply as Southeast Asia.
True. And then there are limitations with the qualifications, with the languages, with the legal system, with the corruption.
Mm-hmm.
It's also very difficult to make business in these countries. As you mentioned, this is your example of Portugal, which is one of the more advanced countries, I would say. But even there, it's difficult. If you come as a foreigner, and it's difficult to do something straight. With the super large companies, for them it's easier. They have this immense apparatus behind them with all their legal departments and with all their consultants and this and that and the political connections and their lobbyists. They can deal with all those complexities better than mid-sized or smaller players. And that's one of the main problems I see with the economy, this concentration process. That these large ones are getting larger and larger, and that there's so little room left for anybody else.
Yeah, and I think this crisis will increase that centralization by having a lot of smaller businesses go out of business and their market share taken by big corporations. Yeah, but that is
drives me. Yeah. So this is the one thing which I really hate about this. It will be the outcome. That many of the smaller companies will go bust, and they cannot come back afterwards. They then have all to work for Amazon or the equivalent of Walmart in Europe.
Yep. But it is all reliant on cheap energy. That's the thing. Without oil, these sort of huge logistical chains would not be possible. Production would have to be more local. Again, I think green and localization go hand in hand, and this would perhaps be a salvation for for at least the European people and their economic power. Because if
it's a little bit what Trump is trying to do now, to bring manufacturing back to the US.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow we have more manufacturing in Europe, but also only in certain sectors and fields. We have to bring back more local production. That's sure a good thing.
Yeah, and which is only possible with if energy prices go up, which I think will happen inevitably, because with the technology of today, there is not a good alternative to hydrocarbons, and hydrocarbons will eventually run out. I can't say when. Well, they won't run out necessarily, but they'll become too expensive. And that will happen.
I'm not so sure about this anymore. No? I'm not so sure about. I used to work for British Petroleum, so I'm also an oil person, crude oil person. And I always followed that field with interest. And this statistics that they're always running out, I have seen so many of them, and seen so many fluctuations of the oil prices and everything. And there is such an oversupply of oil these days. I mean, it's logical that it has to run out at some stage, but in the end, I think nobody really knows. I mean, that's a given for me. There are models, there are assumptions, but most of them are not super reliable.
No, what we do know is that return on investment has been going down. Every barrel of oil produces less barrels now. Even in really, really rich fields like Saudi Arabia and Iran, returns have dropped from something like 80 barrels per oil barrel invested to something like 40. And US shale oil.
But what do we really know from these countries? We know what we are told, but is this the reality?
I'm fairly certain that the geological data we have is good, because all their geological experts, really all experts in Saudi Arabia, are Europeans, all their engineers and so on. And if they see data that would contradict this, they would probably tell about it after their tour of duty in Saudi Arabia, I suspect. I have trust in the fact that European experts would report the truth.
Hopefully. I mean, we have some oil fields in Austria, and they were supposed to run out 50 years ago. During the occupation of the Russians, these oil fields were in the Russian zone. And the Soviets tried to pump out all the oil that was in the ground from 45 to 55. They really, really did their best to take it all. And now we have the year 2020, and these fields are still producing.
Yeah, but what's
not
the return?
Not as efficient, not as much.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's profitable. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it.
Well, that's the thing. Like shale oil, for example. Shale oil is only profitable because of how U.S. Dollar system works, and because they can dump it in their internal market and thus and raise tariffs on other oil. I mean, if they were to put their shale oil on the international market, it couldn't compete.
Only if they subsidize it.
Yeah, it only works by subsidizing it. So there's oil, like for example, geological exploration in Antarctica and so on is very limited. There could be huge oil fields there. There could be in like Greenland, but it becomes too expensive after a certain point to do these sort of things. Therefore, investing in alternative energy sources is a better option. But not everything.
Fully agree. I would prefer it. I would prefer it very much that we are more independent.
Yeah, but the thing is, you can't replace everything, right? Electricity networks are pretty inefficient with energy loss compared to hydrocarbons. Like you can just turn it into gasoline, put it in a tank, and you can use that 50 years later. You can transport it anywhere. It's very versatile. With electricity, you're always reliant. Well, hydrogen's difficult. Hydrogen's difficult because it's, of course, flammable, but also it's a very tiny molecule. So you need to put it on a pressurized. You need to pressurize it, and you lose a lot of energy producing hydrogen. So you've got to electrolyze water, take the hydrogen molecules, pressurize those. That all takes energy, so it's considerably less efficient than gasoline.
True, but at the same time we have this overproduction of energy at these peak hours of when wind is strong and when solar is strong.
Yes.
We also have this overproduction of electricity these days where we don't know what to do with it. So having a less efficiency there wouldn't hurt as long as you have a good storage system.
That's possibly true. I know a company, for example, that just rents a huge warehouses, dumps them full of old style lead and acid batteries, the ones you have in your car, but higher voltage, and they just store energy there and sell it back into the network when there's price fluctuations.
Funny.
Yeah, this one of the things of aspects of energy from solar and wind is indeed these huge fluctuations. Especially Germany has this problem. So companies jump into the market and they do these sorts of things, and then the thing is though they're dependent on prices, so they'll only sell when prices are high. So it's expensive for the networks to do business like this, and energy storing energy in lead and acid batteries is very inefficient. Lithium would be better, or things like thermic energy, molten salt, these sorts of things. But that's technology that's far more expensive than just building huge acid lead batteries. So there's options.
And the resources are limited, no? There's lithium mines in Bolivia.
Yeah, lithium is very limited.
It's also very complicated. Funnily enough, they also have some lithium here in Austria, and there are talks that an American company is starting to mine lithium in Austria, in Carinthia. But it's also complicated, it's expensive, it's invasive into the landscape, and in Bolivia it's polluting the water reserves they have there. So this lithium, I think, I don't know, somehow it feels to me like a dead end, that's replacing one problem with another.
Yeah, all of these solar panels are relatively the least polluting, but also require more rare resources like silver. But rare earth metals, which for example lithium or neodymium from magnets in windmills, to clean these of impurities requires a really polluting chemical process, which is why almost all lithium and neodymium and other such rare metals are shipped to China to be cleaned, because China is the only country with both an industrial base big enough and bad enough environmental regulations to do this sort of thing. So you've got whole areas of the country that are just dead because they just dump the chemicals into nature, because there's basically no safe way without investing really lots into containers and filtering and so on to get rid of these chemicals. So what we've done as the West, as a general trend in everything, is to just outsource everything we don't like out of sight to India, Africa, China, because all our child labor is just there, all the bad environmental regulations are there. We've just outsourced everything. and our lifestyle
Horrible.
cannot be maintained without doing things like that. So one of the first things you do is reduce consumption. But again, these are all very difficult things to sell to the population.
Very much, but in the end, this is not just that's our shortcoming in this international system, that we try to benefit out of these things in an unfair manner, and we cannot expect Africa, China also to develop and to be independent as long as we have this practice. So we also have to change. We have to stop this at some stage.
No, I agree with this as a leftist talking point, but I don't think that the left. My problem with the left isn't that sometimes they address the right issue, but their solutions are always wrong. So that I would
Absolutely.
say there is something of a new colonial system where we do exploit the natural resources and labor of the third world for our own capitalist gain. For example, Germany and France have coal and steel reserve, and Britain has coal reserves as well, quite substantial ones, but we don't mine them. We import coal where necessary most of the time and steel where necessary most of the time, because that way we can preserve our coal and steel as strategical reserves. And we do this with a lot of things, like with outsourcing labor and so on, which allows us to specialize into services and so on. This is all at the expense of everyone else. Like the model of Northern Europe exploiting Southern Europe, that's also happening globally. So I would say that this sort of neocolonial system, in which the IMF plays a huge role, where they, for example, provide loans to developing nations and then require them to pay back in dollars. They require them to to invest in certain things like renewable energies, which can only be provided by European or American companies who have the technical expertise, keeping them financially dependent on our system. So in many ways, this new colonial system is bad, and it isn't. You could say it's beneficial to us, but then who does really benefit from the profits of these companies? It's not the general European populace. It is those people who are at the top.
Not to the full extent. Of course, everybody is a little bit better off than in the past, depending on how you share it. But if you look at it from a very high perspective, then most people would say we are better off than 30 years ago. I personally would disagree, but I think the majority would see it differently. But you're right, of course.
Yeah, no, true. I mean, then again, how much has smartphones really improved the quality of life? It all depends on what you use as a measure, right? I mean, what's the value of a euro to anyone, right? I did this once for a university. I made a calculation of how much each euro invested in education improves quality of education. And once you get past something like 800 euros per student, it becomes immaterial how much you invest. And I think it's similar to most people's income. Past a certain level of income where you've got your basic necessities and luxury goods satisfied, every euro you gain over that has a reversed exponential return, basically, in terms of happiness.
Yeah. And I don't know, the entire education system has also transformed themselves a lot in the last years. I was very more positive to education and higher education 20 or 30 years ago than I would be now. Of course, in some fields, in the STEM fields, it's a little bit different. But with all the other stuff, I don't know whether I would like my son to attend university. I'm not sure.
Yeah, certainly humanities I have huge issues with. But STEM, I think, does deserve to be subsidized because it's hard to subvert STEM. And even STEM adjacent fields like economics have some hard underlying things. And certain fields of sociology, which have data to back them, are good. But I don't know. I mean, to have a good life, maybe just become like a plumber. I don't know.
Yeah. I think if you're a good plumber and if you work a little bit on the weekends as well, you can earn as much as working in an office. And maybe you are freer. You don't have to adapt to all the social pressures that you have in large companies these days. And,
yeah. You'll have
and you have the benefit of really doing something with your hands, and you see the results. The one thing that drives me nuts about working in these large companies and these intellectual fields, you rarely really have your own individual successes. You can rarely ever say, "This is me. This was me. This is my baby." Because it's always a team effort, and it's always so complex that you can't do it all.
Yeah, true enough. Well, is there anything else you want to add, or?
Maybe one thing I would like to come back is the thing with Russia, because that's really an amazing thing for me. I grew up to hate Russia. Mm-hmm. I grew up 20 kilometers away from the Iron Curtain. I've seen the tanks and the machine guns, and I visited Hungary in '85 when I was 15 alone for a holiday at the Balaton, and I was shocked. And when I went to the army, we were trained to fight the Russians, and our life expectancy in a real battle situation would have been 15 minutes. That was the calculation, because we are so close to the border. And then my grandmother was raped by the Russians when they invaded Austria, and so I really had no sympathy for the system, for the people, for the country, for nothing. Mm-hmm. But my mind has changed a little bit in the last years, and on this political level, I really see them as an alternative. And for me, it's also a political alternative for us to be more friendly with them. I mean, we don't have to be best friends, but this artificial thing that is now in the air, that we have to see them as enemies, that's wrong. And I made the transition not to hate them, and I don't understand why our political system is so much against them. I mean, I understand, but
because what we just discussed, they're not integrated into the global system.
Yeah, but emotionally and it's not. That's not fair. That's also not okay. If we treat them the way we do, then we deserve whatever is coming at some stage. We don't deal fairly with them, and I admire Putin and Lavrov for their coolness and how they handle all the crises and how they keep their system afloat. Maybe they are also horrible people, I don't know, but at least they are smart and they're good chess players.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like Russia will have its own geopolitical and economic interests, which aren't necessarily the same as ours. I mean, if we went to go for an energy independent strategy, that would ruin the Russian economy, for example. So they might not appreciate that. But I don't think we should see them as necessarily an ally or an enemy. I don't think you should really consider geopolitical things in those terms, really. They are not just one of many nations, and they have their interests and we have our interests. Where they collide, where they align, we can make deals and do business. If we were to form a stronger independent Europe or a pan-Germanic unity, I think we could do business with Russia, especially on cultural terms, because we would want to have a more traditional society like Russia has. And I think that's one of the big impediments that Russia has in integrating into the international system, is that they don't trust all these liberal values, because they see what it does to countries who adopt them, that it undermines their society, that it plunges their birth rates and increases things like drug addiction and so on, and it's just not good for a stable society.
True. It was funny that at the beginning of the Identitarian movement, there was also a lot of influence from Dugin and Orthodox Church and so. And this was also when they were really fresh and interesting and innovative. Then they have distanced themselves from the Dugin that was not sellable to the public. So there are also some good ideas coming from there. We should not. We tend to ignore them. All of us are so oriented towards the US.
Yeah, far too much.
But there's not so much good coming from the US. They hardly ever impress me with anything.
No, the only people I respect there is Jared Taylor, and to an extent Greg Johnson, and everything else from the United States does not impress me in what they do.
True, same here. Yeah. But at the same time, they're trying also. I mean, this alternative right scene in the US, at least they know how to do podcasts, and they do their stuff, and they try to do their best, but somehow they are lacking the cultural foundations and the intellectual foundations. So many of their talks then go around movies and music and this and that, and always and again, and this is intellectually disappointing.
Yeah, that's true. And the thing that disappoints me most is that there is something of an American literary and intellectual tradition that they could fall back on. I mean, they could go back to Jack London, who was this sort of nationalist but also like he much a socialist. He identified as a socialist, but he had also like a pro-American attitude and conservative values. You could go to what's Hemingway, to the literature of Nantucket and so on. I mean, there's an American literary tradition in the semi-Gothic with Poe. There's you could even go to the sort of leftist writers like Hemingway, or you could go to the fascists from America like Father Coughlin or Ezra Pound. But they don't do any of this. They don't rely on any of their traditional cultural history, except Identity Dixie, who I do think go back to sort of the Southern intellectual tradition to an extent. Southern agrarianism, semi-distributism. The problem there is that they're completely encapsulated by Christian thinking, Protestant Christian thinking, and they are not able to look outside of that box in terms of intellectual terms. But for an American movement, those guys are relatively intellectual and interesting. But yeah, most of the time it's not impressive. It's very disappointing.
Let's hope for the best. Maybe they will also improve. They have to, and we have to learn from them. They should learn from us.
Yeah, I think if you it's often made, but if you take the comparison from Rome to America, I mean, the population of Rome was kept quiet with bread and circuses for a very long time. Their grain subsidy and some entertainment was enough to keep them quiet, and they would still serve in the armies. And eventually, Rome didn't fall because anyone from the inside tried to revive the republic. It was destroyed from the outside by barbarians, and the barbarians took what was valuable and built something new. So I'm not sure that, I think empires corrupt their native population. While at first the conquering empire benefits greatly from conquering, and they take in all the spoils and riches like America did in the 1950s and 60s and even to an extent the 70s, eventually it starts being corrupted, and the population decays in its morals, as you saw with Rome. Spengler had one thing I always like about Romans. He said, in the end, the Romans were so decadent and so devoid of vitalism and martial prowess that they could only enjoy violence with gladiators killing each other. That there was this replacement of their own authentic masculinity by being this really effeminate, enjoying death from others and having no stake in it yourself. So I don't know if they could recover. I don't know.
Yeah, it's also very difficult. No? Sometimes I'm very happy that I'm where I am, and we have our own problems here in Austria, but things are a little bit more straightforward than in the US.
Yeah, we don't have the complications of a global empire and all these financial interests and so on.
And we have our history, we have our legacy, we have our... In my piece of land where I was growing up, my grandfather was involved in archaeology, and they were digging everywhere, and they found so many things from 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. This area was always populated, and there was always something happening. The Americans, they have the benefit of this new continent, this new America, but at the same time, then this makes them lack a lot.
Yeah, but I think it's also the result of that they are such a mix of peoples. Like Australia and New Zealand are new nations, but because they have, when they were founded at least, they had a basically completely British English stock, with some Scots, of course, and some Irish, but they had a defined identity, and they just built on this Anglo identity. Whereas America, which did at the beginning have this Anglo identity, it was quite rapidly swamped by Irish and Germans and then Italians and so on. So it became a mess of identities, and then it's such a large nation, and it has all these global ties, that its intellectual elite and its political elite doesn't look inward at all. They're not concerned with the people. They don't know what the people do. They're looking constantly at geopolitics and at finance and at power plays. That's the thing with empires. Your elite isn't concerned with you anymore.
True.
All right. Anything else you want to add, or shall we call it there?
No, thank you. This was an excellent conversation. Thanks a lot.
All right. Then we'll call it a day there. Thank you for coming on, Robert. And perhaps in future you wanted to discuss, although I guess to an extent we did discuss solar energy and so on, but maybe in detail another time.
Yeah. Always, if you need anything concerning Austria or any of these topics, don't be shy. Give me a ring.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for coming on.
Thanks a lot. Have a nice day. Bye bye.
Bye bye.